Let's now consider 5 different cases for executing an if statement using some example. All right, let's go case by case. And then for each case, I really want to show you how to use the debugger. So in case you haven't really gone through the lab tutorials, Java lab tutorials for week number 2, please do so as soon as possible. So you will really see exactly how useful the visualization benefits of the debugger that can bring to you. All right. Case number 1. So only the first satisfying branch executed, later branches ignored. Okay, let's see. Only the first. I'm talking about the first one, the first branch being satisfied. Okay, so let's now take a look at over here and now go to the Eclipse. So now conceptually, what does that mean? So case number 1 is really talking about Boolean expression 1 actually evaluates to true. Remember the flowchart over here. Boolean expression 1 is exactly over here. So we are saying that. So think about what the execution flow will be like. So let me now use orange highlighter to denote the execution flow. So your program will start over here. And then, let me use a little bit lighter one. You'll start over here. And then you're going to evaluate this particular Boolean condition 1. And now the first case is Boolean expression 1 simply evaluate to true. So now if it evaluates to true, so that means we're going to go this path, right? So now what does that mean? That means all the following branches in the if statement will be ignored, but I'll get there. Okay, you're going to execute its a statement followed by a statement depending on how many there are. It can be arbitrarily many. And then after this is done, you're going to go all the way to, you're going to bypass all the following branches and go straight to the end over here, right? So this will be the execution flow for the first case, right? So now at the same time, you can think about the rest of the if statement over here is simply just ignored. So ignored after the body, the block of code, right? This, you can think about this as the body over here. This is like the body of the first branch. Ignore after the body of Boolean expression 1 is executed. So which means the code over here is simply just run. All right, so just to be very clear about the very first case, right? So conceptually, I'm pretty sure you're fine. So now let's see one concrete example over here. All right, so you can let's see that. You can also see the same example on the slides, but let's go directly to illustration. Let's do the conceptual trace, and then we'll do this on Eclipse as well. So let's say if we got some input value over here called I, right? Let's say we try to read this from the user, and the user has entered -4 over here, right? So now I is simply -4. So what we're gonna do is, you can think about, so you want to do two things over here. So when we try to trace on the flowchart, this is just for you to understand abstractly how things work. However, I'll recommend at the end of the day, you really want to be able to trace directly on the code. That might be a better way to go. But I'll do both just in the very beginning to introduce you to the idea. So now I will be -4, so which means we're going to evaluate this particular branch first, the first branch. So to evaluate this, we're basically going to say -4 less than 0. So this is a relational expression. Is that true or false? Well, it is the case, so that will be true. So when this is actually true, so that means we're going to execute the body of this particular branch. We're simply going to print out I is negative. Right? Makes sense? And then the rest over here is simply bypassed, ignored. Or you can say bypassed. Alright, so it makes sense. So I trace in both versions, either in the flowchart or also on the code. I would say tracing on the code directly would be what I recommend you to eventually to adapt to. But if you're still really missing the flow chart, maybe back to 1012, I can appreciate that, but you should eventually adapt to Jackie's way to trace the code. All right. Let's now use Eclipse, which is equally important to see how things work. So if I go to the imported project, which I assume you already have done, So you can go to the class called if statement case 1 to case 4. So for case 1 to case 4, we're going to use the same program, reading from the user input. All right. So now let's take a look. If I simply double click on that, so that one that you can take a look is exactly the same program, except that I simply read the I from the input integer from the user. Okay. So what I will do is I'm simply just going to right click on the program and say run as Java application. All right. Remember the input we put was actually -4. Let's just verify the output first of all. If I say -4, it's simply just going to say I is negative. So it's just going to print out, just going to execute this particular print statement as the body, right? It's not going to execute this. It's not going to execute this, not this either. But now, how can we use the debugger to visualize the execution in slow motion, right? That's something I showed you in the lab, week number 2 Java tutorial, but I'm going to show you once more. All right, it's really fundamental. So what I want to do is I want to say I want to put in the beginning of the if statement, right? You can think about this part over here is a single if statement. I'm going to put a breakpoint over here, okay, to see. So I'm just not going to explain again what the breakpoint is, and also what step over, step into, and step out. They are already discussed in detail in your week number 2 Java tutorial video. Please review them. All right. I'm going to put the breakpoint by double click on the line number 11 over here, and then I'm going to launch the debugger. I'm going to right click on the same class, and then I would say debug as Java application. All right, so you don't have to worry about any red line like this. You don't have to worry, right? It might happen in some version of the Eclipse. All right, so now we haven't really reached this part yet, because now we are now being prompted for the input. So I'm gonna put the same. I'm gonna say -4 and then enter. As soon as I say that, it's going to now launch the debugger, because it's now going to reach the breakpoint at this line number 11. So I'm just going to say switch to the debug perspective, right? So now I'm now in the debugger, right? We talk about variables, breakpoint, and expressions in your week number 2 tutorial videos. I'm going to assume you know that already, right? So now over here, we got this particular Boolean expression over here, right? So now we are now in the beginning. You can think about the execution flow is right before we try to evaluate this branch, right before that, right? So what should we do? Let's now predict what's going to happen. So you can use the expressions panel over here. In case you don't have it, you can simply go to Window, go to Show View, and then you will see expressions. Okay, that's also illustrated in your Java tutorial video. So now I can simply type some expression over here. I'm just going to type exactly this Boolean expression over here, I less than 0. It's a Boolean branching condition. It's a Boolean condition that's used to branch. So I less than 0, enter. You can see this is already true. So I can predict what's going to happen is like this. So since this branching condition is actually true, so I'm going to, as soon as I say step over, you can see I got step over here. Again, the difference between step into and step over explained in your Java tutorial videos, right? If I say step over, it's now going to go to line number 12, simply because we predicted I less than 0 is actually true. Oh, by the way, what's i's value? If you go to variables over here, you can see I has been entered as -4. So that's why i's value over here is -4. You can see the visualization by debugger is pretty nice, right? Very thorough and complete. All right, so now now you can see the console has not really printed out I is negative just yet, because now you can see the blue arrow over here. That means we're right in the beginning, right before we try to execute this line, right before. So now if I say step over again, so it will now print out I is negative. So now you can think about this part over here. We're now at the end of this particular branch. So now conceptually, let's go back to our flowchart very quickly. You can think about we are now right at the end over here, right over here, okay? Or in the code, we're right here, right? Just be careful, all right? Be mindful over here. Let's go back here. And then if I say step over, what's going to happen, right? Eclipse apparently knows about the semantics or meaning for if statement. Given that we already executed the first satisfying branch, so all the rest will be ignored. So let's predict what's going to happen. If I say step over here, it's not going to do any of these. It's going to jump to exactly line number 24, right? If I say step over, exactly, and then we are done, right? That's the very first case. I hope that's already thorough and complete enough for you. All right, and we are done. So I can say stop, and then I can go back to Java perspective. And let's go over to case number 2. Okay, that's your case number 1, and then you can just go over that, right? I is negative. Case number 2. And case number 2 over here, we still got the same principle, but let me show you a different case over here. Let's go to iPad, right? Go to case number 2. For case number 2 over here, what we have is Boolean expression number 1 evaluate to false, but Boolean expression number 2 evaluate to true. All right, that's the setup for case number 2. And let's now try to execute this on the flowchart, right? And then we'll do it on the Java code and also Eclipse. We're gonna do this for all the 5 cases for you. So just to make sure you got proper understanding for if statement. It's a little bit laborious apparently to teach, but I really hope this can really help you learn. Okay, let's try this. So now for case number 2, we start with evaluating this Boolean condition number 1, the Boolean expression 1. And in this case, it's going to be false, which means we're going to bypass the body of its body, right? So this part is going to be ignored. All right, and then we assume that in this case, actually, over here, let me just go back to highlighter. So now Boolean condition 2 is going to be evaluated to true. So that means when we evaluate Boolean condition 2 over here, it's going to be true. So that means we're going to execute the body of this particular branch one by one, right? One by one over here. After that, at the end, we're going to bypass all the following branches over here and then go to here. And then we are done, right? So that means over here, all the following branches over here is just going to be bypassed. So you can see now for the second case, there are 2 things we bypassed, right? Number 1, we bypassed the body of the previous branch that evaluated to false. And number 2, we actually bypass all the following branches after the first satisfying branch, right? Hopefully that makes sense to you. All right. So now let's go back to the same program, right? So now I could have asked you, I could have hide this particular one and then ask you to give me one example input that will demonstrate exactly the second branch to be executed, but that's okay. Let's be a little bit lenient over here. So I'll give you the value already, but we'll do some exercise later in the lecture. All right. So now we're going to try with a different input. So it's going to be 5 over here. All right. But we're still going to go for sequential execution. So branch number 1 over here. So now we're going to evaluate this particular Boolean expression. So 5 less than 0 is going to be false, right? I hope you agree. In that case, we're going to bypass the body of this particular branch, just bypass, all right? And then we're going to go to the else if part and then evaluate this. And then we're going to evaluate this particular one. Remember, I is 5. So 5 less than 10 should be the case, which is true. If this is true, so that means we're going to execute its print statement as the body, right? So now it's going to be I is less than 10, right? There should be less than, just one then, all right? Less than 10. And then what's going to happen now? What about the following branches? What about remaining part? In that case, we're not going to execute the rest. So these will just be bypassed. All right, I'm not sure about you, but for me, I personally find myself more comfortable with tracing directly on the code like this. But if you still feel comfortable with a flowchart, try that. But you want to kind of depart from that sooner rather than later. All right. So that's about how we trace the second one on the paper. So let's now try the Eclipse quickly. Okay, for case number 2, we're going to use the same program over here on Eclipse. And then the breakpoint will just be the same. And then we're going to, we already executed the debug session already. So we just say, click on the debug button over here and enter integer value. And we're going to use 5 over here. Okay, I'm going to switch to debug perspective. So now we are here, right? let's predict what's going to happen. Well, we already entered I less than 0 previously, so it's going to be false. So now what's going to happen? Because this part over here is simply false, so that means when I say step over, I'm going to bypass line number 12. So that means bypass line number 12, and then we are evaluating else if in line number 14 exactly how I illustrated on the iPad, right? And then, so now we're going to predict what's going to happen. I less than 10, right? So I can simply type this expression over here. I can say I less than 10 over here. So that one is true. So this will be the first satisfying branch for us, right? The previous one is actually false, so it's not satisfying. This will be the first satisfying branch. So predicts what's going to happen. Since this is true, so if I say step over, it should really execute this particular code. It should be start executing it. So if I say step over, I'm now here right before I execute this line. I is less than 10, right? I can just move the panel a bit over here so you can see it. All right, if I say step over, what's going to happen? We're going to execute this. Step over, you can see the console. I is less than 10, right? Again, it's a typo, right? You just get rid of the then. You can fix that later. And then we're going to say step over again. What's going to happen? Since this part has been executed already, so the rest will be bypassed, right? So now we're going to jump from line number 16 to line number 34. If I say step over, exactly, right? So now you can see the debugger, again, visualize exactly how the execution should go for you in slow motion. So later on, I'm going to show to you later, either in the weekly tutorial video or the lecture, how you can debug using debugger. But that's something you really want to try to use and get used to it. All right, so now let's switch back to Java perspective. Let's now, let me just fix this typo over here. So let me get rid of this then over here. All right. All right, so now let's now go on to case number 3. So now I can possibly speed up a little bit, right? You can see for the very first 2 cases, I go very thoroughly and slowly with you. Let's speed up maybe a little bit. Case number 3. All right, for case number 3, the same principle, but now let's see what's going to happen. Okay, similar, but now we say condition 1, branching condition 1 and 2 evaluate to false, but 3 evaluate to true. All right, let's see what's going to happen. In the flow chart over here, we actually don't have a Boolean expression 3. Let me draw that very quickly for you. All right, so you can think about what's happening here is we got Boolean condition number 3, Boolean expression number 3, and that one there, if true, is going to have the body over here, statement number 1, and also statement number 2, and also he's going to join this way, right? The regular pattern. All right. So now let's try to execute on the flowchart. So now Boolean condition 1 and Boolean condition 2 are both false, which means I start with the program over here. Boolean condition 1 simply evaluate to false, and then Boolean condition 2 also evaluate to false. So far I have bypassed this part over here and also this part over here. They simply bypassed. And then in this case, we assume that Boolean condition 3 is actually going to evaluate to true, meaning that we're going to evaluate this and it will be true over here, and then execute the statements in its body one by one, and then eventually we go all the way to the end over here. All right, and what do we bypass? The rest of the if statement over here, and they're also bypassed. All right. Straightforward, not surprise. So now let's go to execute this code over here. Let's say we try to use over here, let's say input value 10. All right. So now evaluate first branch, 10 less than 0, apparently false. So we're going to bypass this part over here, and then evaluate the second branch. We're going to evaluate this. 10 strictly less than itself is also false. All right, so that means also bypass its body over here, and then we're going to evaluate the next one, right? And now if I try to see evaluate this, so 10 is equal to itself, apparently it is true. So that means we're going to execute whatever that's in the body over here. We're going to execute this part over here. So I is equal to 10. And then bypass the rest, right? All right, hopefully that makes sense to you. And now for this particular case number 3, I'm going to leave to you to actually trace it yourself, right? Hopefully I can rely on that, maybe. All right. So now case number 4 and case number 5, I will still use the Eclipse to show you. But for case number 3, I'm pretty sure you can do it. Do it as an exercise. Let me write it down explicitly for you. Hopefully you feel more obliged to do it. Exercise. Run debugger on Eclipse for case number 3. All right, very important exercise I would expect you to complete. All right, let's now go on to case number 4. All right, we already talked about this. Let's talk about case number 4. So now case number 4, interesting. No satisfying branches and an else part is actually present. Then the default action is executed. All right, so what does that mean? Okay, so now let's go for case number 4 over here. All right, so case number 4. So case number 4 and case number 5, in some way they're similar, but if statement we are talking about is a little bit different. All right, so let's now talk about this. So now we're saying Boolean condition 1, 2, all the way to n. They're all false. And then, most importantly, you can see for this particular example, we say that the else statements is actually present. So now, first of all, let's highlight what's the else statement. You can think about else statement is after 1, 2, 3, all the way to n. And then, if all of them are actually false, in that case, this part over here is the else part. You can think about all the statements when all the preceding branches are simply false, evaluated false. In that case, these will be the default actions to execute. Let me just annotate this first. So these will be the default actions. For else. All right. So now let's take a look. What's going to happen? I try to execute on the flow chart. So now 1, 2, 3, all the way to n will be false. Well, easy. You start with this. Evaluate condition 1, false. Evaluate condition 2, false. All the way to evaluate condition n, also false. So that will be the last branching condition for your if statement. In that case, it's also false. So you are going to execute the else part over here, one by one, and then get to the end. Okay. That's what's going to happen. So you really want to consider, really compare and contrast the execution path I show for each case over here. All right. So now for case number 4, let's see one example over here. All right. So now we're going to have, you can see the else part over here. So that's the else part I highlighted, right? Just be corresponding to the flow chart, right? That's the else part. So now the value is simply 12 over here. Okay. You can see we try to evaluate this first. So it's going to be 12 less than 0, false, bypass the body. And then evaluate the second branch over here. So evaluate this, 12 less than 10, apparently false. That means we're going to bypass this print statement, the body. And then another else if over here. So now 12 is equal to 10. Apparently also false, so we bypass. So we have done the first branch and also all the following branches. So everything has been evaluated to false for this particular input value. So now we have no choice but to only execute. So now you can see now we are reaching the else one over here. So in this particular case, remember else part is optional, but in this case over here, else is actually there. So we're going to execute this. So it's going to be I is greater than 10. All right, so that's about case number 4. Let's do this very quickly on Eclipse. All right, quickly. Now let's go back to Eclipse over here, and then the same program here. Remember, it's case 1 to case 4. So now we're starting still breakpoint here. Launch the debugger, and then enter integer value. I'm going to enter 12. switch to debug perspective, now we're here. So you know what? I'm gonna do a little bit of speed up over here just to show you. You can see all the branching condition here. I is less than 0, apparently is false. I is less than 10 is false. And then you can see also I is equal to 10. That's also false, right? We can already predict all the branching condition, all the 3 branching conditions over here will be evaluated to false, as we can see from the expressions panel over here. So now if I try step over, it's going to bypass to evaluate the second branch, but it's also false. So it's going to, if I say step over, it's going to bypass and then evaluate the third one. But the third one is also false, right? So we can predict it's going to go to the else part, right? You can see else one, there's no branching condition to really evaluate. Automatically, implicitly, you can think about it's automatically true. So we're going to evaluate just the else part over here. I is greater than 10. Step over, I is greater than 10. All right? Hopefully that makes sense. So now that's case number 4 we have illustrated. So now let's go on for the last case, case number 5. All right, so for case number 5, we say no satisfying branches like in case number 4, but now the else part is actually absent, right? So that's the only difference between the 2 cases. And then nothing is going to be executed, but let's see why. First of all, let's look at the flowchart, right? Let's take a look. So for case number 5, you can see here we say else statement is simply absent over here. You can see the way I do it is you can see after the last branching condition, there's simply nothing over here. So it's simply black out over here. So that means if this is simply, you can think about, there's simply no else branch. So if somehow this simply evaluated to false for the last Boolean condition over here, they will go straight to the end of the if statement. Okay, that's what I mean by that being absent. But once you see the code example, you will see exactly what I meant. So now let's see this. Boolean expression 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to end are simply just false. So this part is really the same as the case number 4. Let's try that. So how's the execution flow going to go? Start with the if statement. First branching condition will evaluate to false. And then second one, evaluate it, also false. All the way to the last one over here, also false. So we also go for this branch. So go to the end. That's it. So we just, you can see nothing has been executed. You can see none of the bodies over here. So let's see what's being bypassed. This is bypassed, the body for the non-satisfying branch. The body for the non-satisfying branch is also bypassed. Similarly, you can see all the way to the last branching condition, false. So we also bypass the body over here, right? So you only execute nothing when there's no default action. Let's take a look at the code. Over here, you can see we got, as I said before, remember a few pages ago, I actually summarized all the possible shapes for your if statement over here. Remember this one? So remember we're talking about 1, 2, and also 3, and also 4. So you can think about case number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 somehow correspond to exactly the code structure you will have to deal with somehow, right? Just try to study these two together, all right? Let me go back to case number 5 for the code. There we go. So for case number 5, let's do that quickly. Also, I want to show you also the eclipse. So now I value will be 12. Evaluate the first branch. 12 less than 0, false. Bypass. And also evaluate second branch. 12 less than 10, also false. So bypass. All right. So far you can see that, right? And then also the last branching condition, I is equal to 10, 12 is equal to 10 is also false. All right, so that means we are also going to bypass this. So you can think about execution flow. We now go to the end of the if statement because there's no else, and then nothing's going to be done. So now the console just like that, nothing. Right? So that's it. All right. So now let's take a look at the Eclipse to see exactly what's going to happen. Let's now go to Eclipse. So you can see we really have done some complete illustration about different cases for if statement. So I would say after this video combined with the previous video, the meaning for executing an if statement to you should be very, should be crystal clear. All right. Let's now, oh, I forgot to actually stop the previous session. Just say stop over here. All right. All right, so let's now do the following. Okay, so, right, so I just need to close this. So now we need, case number 5. Let me, we're still in the debug perspective. Let me switch back to Java perspective. Let me now go to if statement case number 5, right? You can see, by the way, you can see in the previous case number 1 to case number 4, there is an else part. So the optional part is actually there. But now, let me close them. And now if I go to case number 5, you can see there is no else part. You can read the comments over here as well. So there's simply no default actions when all of the above branching condition evaluated false. All the above branching conditions, right? Let's try. I'm going to put a breakpoint over here, line number 11, double click on the blue bar over here. And then, because that's going to be the first time I run it, so I'm going to right click. Debug as Java application. All right. Enter an integer value. So now the value I will try will be 12. Enter. Right. Now I'm going to switch to debug perspective. Right. So you can see I got all the expressions over here. The first branch, I less than 0, I can predict is going to be false for the expressions panel. For the second branching condition, I less than 10, I can also predict it's going to be false. For the last branching condition, I is equal to 10, I can also predict under expressions it's going to be false. So let's try. So now if I say step over, it's going to bypass and then go to else if. So think about which line it's going to go to. If I evaluate at line number 11, it's going to jump to line number 14. All right. And this branching condition is also false over here. So now it's going to jump to line number 17. All right. And then because this branching condition here is also false, so now we know that it's going to go to, it's going to bypass everything, right? You can think about this no else part over here. So now if I say step over, it go all the way to just the next statement over here, which is not part of the if statement. All right, guys, I hope that's really comfortable for you to really see exactly how if statement work. I try to be a little bit slow and also thorough about how you can trace your program in both in the flowchart on the paper, like what I did on my iPad, and also on the Eclipse. Right. Let me stop this. You can see nothing has been printed out, right? Let me go back there and make a summary, conclusion about this particular part of the lecture. All right, so that will be case number 5, right? So I would say for this video over here, you basically learn about how to do tracing in 3 ways. Either you try to trace on the flowchart. If you already draw the flowchart for the if statement, you can trace on that and see what the behavior might be. Number 2, you can trace directly on the code, which I highly recommend you try. So that would be the another very important learning outcome I would like you to achieve from this course. You can trace directly on the code to see what's going to happen. Okay, and number 3 over here, you're going to see exactly how you can trace using the breakpoints and also switch to the debugger perspective by launching the debugger. Right, that'll be number 3. I would say number 2 on the paper. And also number 3 on Eclipse will be the ways to go. Eventually, once your program gets complicated, we don't need a flowchart anymore. That's not going to scale for complicated algorithms or methods. All right, so get used to both on the paper and also on the Eclipse. Right, and then we'll try to show you more example later.